The term human rights never appears in the entire manifesto. There's no place on the planet anymore where all of your rights are respected.
So you can't take a knee, though, if you're a quarterback.
I can very easily imagine the Skynet scenario. Maybe your best defense against an evil AGI is your own AI. Maybe it's time for at least the US to recognize freedom of thought.
Hey, Steve. How's Germany for you today?
It could be worse. Snow's gone.
You're in Berlin at the moment?
I'm in Berlin, yeah.
Steve, I want you to tell everyone what you do at Haltia.AI.
Well, like everybody, I wear multiple hats. I don't think anybody has just one hat, but the one that brings me here to you is the hat of ethicist.
What does that mean to people listening to us today?
Well, AI's got lots of ethical implications. Many technologies do, but maybe more than most. And it's new, and we're still exploring the landscape, and the implications. And things are changing so fast, it becomes more important to predict the future.
Yeah, like any revolution, right? Any tech revolution, industrial revolution, any new technology, or there's always going to be a group that are going to be against it. And so it's good to have someone like you as part of the team, because what you are able to do is show the other side of the fence that there are certain ethics that are being followed.
Yes, and there's two sides to almost every one of these questions, right? So, and I'm not necessarily always on the same side as our programmers,
Yeah.
I like to think that I can see both, play the role of seeing both.
Well, look, we're here today to talk about a document that you wrote. You authored a document called The Right to Compute.
Yes, I call it the Declaration.
What is it about you that motivated you to write the Declaration for the Right to Compute?
I mean, personally, I'm an analyst. That's my take. It's my analysis of the problem. We've been having, of course, these discussions for quite a long time about, the implications of AI and, the dangers of it and such. But then what crystallized it was Mark Andreessen wrote this techno-optimist manifesto. Basically, he made a very long case for why technology and free markets are what increase human prosperity. And of course, we were all completely on board with that. I mean, it's hard to argue with it. Many people would argue with it, but we would not.
Knowing you, I don't think you would allow that one to pass without a little dig or argument.
Yeah, well, I lived a year in the Soviet Union and many more years in the former Soviet Union, and I've seen the implications of the lack of free markets and lack of technology. Anyway, I think it's obvious to everyone by now. But what was frustrating to me was that his arguments were completely utilitarian. The term human rights never appears in the entire manifesto. It's all just evidence that, look, technology and free markets make our lives better. So come on, guys, let's support that. Now, he makes references at the end. He provides a long list of references to economists and philosophers and such who would make a principled case. But his argument was all utilitarian, and that kind of frustrates me. At this stage of the game, centuries of human progress, we shouldn't need to make this case, and we should just be able to simply assert, look, human beings have rights.
This takes me to perfect segue to my next question. Why is this topic so important to you? Why does it get your knickers in a twist?
The topic of human rights has always been important to me. It's been something I've been involved with, maybe directly. For
I understand.
But the right to compete specifically, there's three rights that kind of go together, right? There's the right to access to information, there's the right to think about, to process that information, and then the right to express the results of what's in your head. Okay, so we commonly say nowadays freedom of information, freedom of thought, and freedom of speech. And those rights, I mean, at least the concept of them has existed for all time. We've been getting information, thinking about it, and speaking for all of human history. But with technology, the rights all get expanded. When we talk today about the freedom of information, we mean right to access to the internet. And that is indeed recognized by the United Nations now. They've actually formalized that, right? The internet is today so essential to human life that they recognize it as a fundamental human right. And same with the freedom of speech. It's defined and recognized very broadly, not just speaking with your mouth, but expressing yourself in all kinds of ways and augmented by technology. not just telegraph and telephone now, but all manner of technologies. And in the United States, it's defined very broadly and defended very rigorously to include things like burning the flag. You can burn sacred symbols, make people very angry, but that's we consider a fundamental right.
So you can't take a knee, though, if you're a quarterback.
Well, the federal government can't stop you from that, but a private organization can. If you're on private property, then that's then.
I'm only joking.
So in between the information access and the expression is the thought, and we've been enhancing human thought with technology also from the beginning of time. We've been counting on our fingers. We moved to counting using the abacus, finally the slide rule, and computers, and now these supercomputers. We augment human thought with paper and pencil. You take notes because you can't remember. Your human memory is limited, so we write things down. We make markings on stone, up to obviously books, and again the internet. So today, what's the current state of the art of technology is now AI.
Speaking of AI and the right to compute, what is the place of the right to compute in the world or movement of an EAC?
Yeah, well, the EACs, I guess they would both assert the right to do what they're doing, to the right to accelerate, right? It's called effective accelerationism in response to effective altruism. So it's effective accelerationism as opposed to effective altruism, because effective altruism is what gave birth to this the deceleration, pause movement. I think would agree that you have both a human right to compute, to pursue these technologies, as well as they would agree with Mark Andreessen and these things obviously make life better. And to forego that opportunity to slow down is just to forego wealth, to forego not just becoming rich, but also helping the poor. It's foregone economic growth, basically.
So we were talking about motivation, or why you wrote the Declaration for the Right to Compute. When I get motivated about something, I'd say sometimes it's a reaction to something that happened to me that got me motivated to act in a particular way or react in a particular way. So I guess the question is, who's trying to limit our right to compute?
There's several parties who are acting more or less in good faith. There's the pausers, they're associated with effective altruism, but that's not necessarily inherent to that. Like I personally like effective altruism. All right, I don't think it's necessarily involves decelerationism. But anyway, they sincerely believe there's a threat. They see many scenarios.
Who's they?
The decels.
I see them on Twitter a lot, or shall I say X?
Yeah, there's I know many people who sincerely believe that there are several scenarios where AI causes great societal harm. The one that I personally take seriously is the super empowered bad actor. So it's the human being, the virus creator, the creator of computer viruses, human viruses, etc. The hackers looking for exploits. They can do all their previous bad things ever more effectively.
So how exactly are they threatening us?
In the same ways as before, right? With viruses and exploits and things and manipulation, the manipulation of the masses to go in a certain political direction.
So would misinformation be included in that?
Misinformation, all the usual, the deep fakes and everything else. Yeah, so all of that. And that's real. But what's the defense against that? Is the defense against that to restrict access to these tools only to trusted people? Or is it to rather empower everyone with tools to help them defend themselves? Or at least not restrict the tools to the few who themselves become corrupted? So, there's definitely arguments to be made. And then there's other concerns they have about artificial general intelligence, AGI, of a real super intelligence emerging that, the Skynet, from the Terminator, the Skynet scenario. And we can all easily imagine that, because we've all seen so many movies and read so many science fiction books where that scenario takes place, right? So we're kind of vulnerable to what's called the availability heuristic. Our assessment of the likelihood of a threat depends on our ability to imagine it, right? How easily can I imagine getting struck by lightning?
And Hollywood's done a great job at that.
Hollywood's done a great job. And there's 100 times as many science fiction books about this as there are movies. Okay, and there's plenty of movies. So I've read a bunch of those books myself. I can very easily imagine the Skynet scenario.
Did you know, Steve, Cybernet actually exists? It's a company in Japan that makes robots.
Should I be concerned?
No, I don't think you should be.
All right, I'll.
Okay. So implications. Are you advocating for
Hmm.
a computing entitlement?
We are not actively advocating for that. We're very narrowly advocating for the, it's called a negative right, the freedom of compute, some would say in this case. When you say the freedom of something, it means the ability to act without restriction. However, we're saying this because compute is so important, like speech, like thought, like other necessities of human life. It's important. So if you were of a mind to advocate for positive rights, for entitlements, you might include compute in your list of human necessities. You might factor it into your calculation of a universal basic income, for example. That wouldn't surprise me. We ourselves are not advocating, but we're very narrowly focused on just this one right and maybe the associated rights to compute, the freedoms of information.
Okay. So
Speech.
Steelman's the opposition's argument, right? Is there a legitimate reason to regulate compute in your mind, Steve?
Yeah, if I were to take that point of view, I would make an analogy between compute and the right to self-defense. I think everyone would argue that we have a right to self-defense to some degree. If you're attacked, if your family is attacked, you can defend yourself. And I would say you have a right to meaningful self-defense. Okay, if you're attacked with a knife, you don't have to respond with your fists, right? You can use a weapon. And in the modern age, what's the modern technology of combat? It's firearms. So I would argue that you have a right to use the modern weaponry of a common soldier. But where does that end? Do you have the right to own a hand grenade, machine gun?
Well, Gandhi would tell you an eye for an eye makes the whole world go blind.
Yeah. Well, say that when your family is attacked. All right.
No, I hear you.
Your animal instincts kick in. You're going to defend yourself and your family and your territory. But does it have a limit? Some would say no. Yeah, you have the right to a nuclear weapon. Well, if you've got weapons of a certain scale, up to weapons of mass destruction, you become a threat to your neighbor. If your neighbor says, trust me, I've got this packet of anthrax, but it's only for self-defense, you'd feel a little bit nervous, okay? So that's a debate to be had where that right to self-defense ends. And likewise, you could argue that a super powerful computer creating a super powerful large language model is now creating an active threat. And up to, let's say, an AGI, which might be a significant threat. So if you could really make that case that it is an active threat for your neighbor to have an AGI, or in this interconnected world, anybody anywhere to have an AGI, well, then you could draw the analogy to the right to self-defense and make that case. But the burden of proof is on you. And then you also have to answer the second question, okay, what's the best defense against that? Maybe your neighbor having the anthrax or the AGI really is a threat to you. Okay, is the best solution to prohibit access to that? Well, what if the bad guys are going to get it anyway? You need defense. Well, against anthrax, you having anthrax might not defend very well against that. Or you having some other disease available to inflict. But maybe your best defense against an evil AGI or an evil actor empowered by an AGI is your own AGI or your own AI, your own tools.
Okay, so the Declaration for the Right to Compute. What's your objective?
I can see several paths. Obviously, you want to raise general awareness. People should be aware of this, and they should recognize the right and value it. And then what actions they could take. I'm not sure that signing petitions is going to do very much good. Writing your congressman or other political representative may influence things. Maybe we need a constitutional amendment. Now, United Nations, first of all, and in Europe, there is an actual recognized formal freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. That's actually in the European Charter of Rights. The United States does not have that. We have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, or I say the practice of religion. So Congress may not interfere with the practice of religion, but they never bothered to formally recognize a freedom of thought, what happens in your head, because back in those days, 200 years ago, nobody was threatening it. In the case of Europe, the EU, United Nations, that was all post-World War II, where there actually were ideologies threatening your freedom of thought, right? We had George Orwell's 1984, where he talks about wrong think and the thought police and all that, right? So, maybe it's time for at least the US to recognize freedom of thought and define it broadly to include technological augmentation of that thought. Your unaided brain today is not really of much use.
Okay, so give me your top 3 objectives. Number 1, for people to know that they have that right and recognize that it is a right, correct? Mm-hmm. So that's 1. What's number 2?
Number 2 would be to spread the word, to each other, social media, and maybe up to including contacting your political representatives. What I personally would like to see is some legislation. We can't ourselves promote that, but maybe we can offer some model legislation, and hopefully people take that up in the U.S. at the state level, state constitutions, where that could be done, and create some spaces where people's rights are recognized. And otherwise, there are places in the world where rights are more or less respected. So I'm always in favor of moving to those places. Okay, I say that here from Berlin.
Yeah, I was about to say, Steve.
Yeah,
right. You're sitting in Berlin. Really scream techno optimism to me.
It's definitely not techno optimist, but at least they aspire to great things. Here.
Come to Dubai.
To Dubai, yeah, you're in Dubai, huh?
I'm trying to put a spell on you. Did you notice that?
Yeah, well, Dubai definitely does recognize some rights much more, rigorously than other places. Not all rights. There's no place in the planet anymore where all of your rights are respected. So you've got to make an assessment, which rights are important to you, and measure it as objectively as you can, and vote with your feet.
Okay, so last thing. If you had everybody's ear in the world for 30 seconds, look into the camera and tell them what you want to tell them.
Human rights are important. Human rights do exist. They are not simply something that we create out of thin air. Has become fashionable again to say. And places that respect human rights prosper. Places that make their rights squishy and subjective, they tend to not prosper. So I recommend first and foremost recognizing formally human rights, the rights to do things. Individuals have rights. There are certain things that no group may do to them without violating their rights. And what could be more core than this triad of rights? Access to information, thought, and then expression of information.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. You know what? I'm honored to be working with you. I learn a lot when I talk to you. I certainly learned a lot today. Thank you for having the time. I know you're really, really busy. And, working on a bootstrapped startup like Haltia.AI, we're all wearing several different hats. And it's the life of a founder, right? So thanks for your time. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. All right. Take care.